share.
Okay, are you guys got my dog Newton here? He's the smart one of the two of us.
Newton.
Sir Isaac Newton. He's a 4-year-old golden doodle. Very bonded to me, maybe because when we got him as a puppy, you know, the protocol is you put him in you cage train them so they can stay at a vet or whatever, or, you know, stay somewhere if you go away. But he hated the cage so much. I just slept on the sofa. He slept on top of me the first month. So he really bonded to me. I'm the, you know, the one my wife comes home, he runs past her wondering where I am. Drives her nuts.
Well, you probably take him for the walks, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I take him for the walks and all the rest of it. Yeah. So why don't I get started?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself for the benefit of my audience. We don't have a lot of subscribers yet. We're about 15 podcasts in. I don't know if you were on my earlier podcast. I had a podcast called Value Engineering Experts. This is produced by Dante, so
okay,
cost effective.
Yeah.
And he's going to pay your file. Make a contribution to your
No, that'd be awesome. So I'm a climate system scientist. I've taught climatology, meteorology, oceanography, mostly at University of Ottawa, physical geography at Carleton. So I'm a climate, I say climate system expert because many scientists are very focused in narrow fields, but I like to look at the overall climate system. And on my YouTube channel, I have I'm approaching a couple thousand videos. I try to generally put out about 3 a week. I take peer-reviewed science papers and try to explain them in, you know, everyday layman's terms so people can understand. So I'm trying to educate people on climate, but also other areas as well. You know, I look at AI stuff and you know, lots of different, mostly science topics, but you know, there is some other stuff. So I'm very interested in Roman concrete versus you know, the concrete that we have today. So basically, you know, the lifetime of today's concrete, the service life, isn't very long. I mean, it's basically decades. You might reach 100 years. It depends on how and where it's used. You know, of course, concrete is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere in our society. I mean, our society is built up on this. So, you know, in general, buildings, infrastructure can last 50 to 100 years. Residential flatways like driveways, patios, sidewalks, 25 years to 50 years. You know, if they're well designed, well built structural elements, they can last maybe, you know, 100 years. In favorable environments, they can last longer. But the key factors that limit concrete, and concrete, it produces a lot of emissions, a lot of greenhouse gases, so it contributes to climate change. So anything we can do to get longer lifetime of concrete would result in lower emissions. So the key factor is, you probably are aware of these things, and then maybe I'll get into some stuff if you're not. But the key factors that limit the life of concrete is the environment, like freeze-thaw cycles. So like, you know, where we are in southern Ontario is one of the worst. It's one of the hardest on concrete structures in the world. You know, Romans had generally warmer weather. We think of them, you know, in warmer climates without the freeze-thaw cycles. But it's also the de-icing salts. Moisture gets into the concrete, aggressive chemicals, and all those things accelerate the cracking or spalling of concrete, especially in climates, like I said, like southern Ontario. So the design and materials of the structure, the concrete, is crucial. Like, you know, you basically you know, and it determines the strength of the concrete, like water cement ratios, the admixtures, you know, all those things, you know, any rebar or other materials to increase the tensile strength of concrete. All of these things affect the durability and the corrosion resistance. And, you know, so basically, also, of course, the construction quality, you know, the placement, compaction, curing times, the joint detailing, all of these things, if they're not done properly, it can lower the lifetime drastically down to 25 to 40 years for structures, exposed slabs and things. You see some new builds that were done around 2000 and they're already showing severe corrosion. There's a parking garage close to me in Ottawa. I don't know what they did wrong, but they've had to redo it after about 10 years even. They've had to redo a lot of it. So it was just built poorly. And then, of course, maintenance, sealing. Do you have timely crack repair, drainage control, avoiding harsh chemicals? Those can add decades. If you maintain properly the concrete structures, you can get decades to their lifetime. So the main reasons for failure, I guess one of the biggest, probably the biggest reason, at least in our neck of the woods, is rebar corrosion. So rusting rebar, because when you get the iron oxide forming on the steel, it takes up more volume, so it can push the concrete away, causing cracks, delamination. It's a very common end-of-life mechanism in modern reinforced concrete. And then surface deterioration, I've mentioned the freeze-thaw damage. With climate change, changing extreme weather events, we're getting a lot more freeze-thaw cycles than we used to. In most winters, this one's an exception. It's stayed pretty cold, very few freeze-thaw, but we do get some still. Scaling from salts, abrasion from traffic, all those things can reduce the performance until, it's more economical to replace the concrete rather than try to repair it. Now, I mentioned greenhouse gases, emissions from concrete. So concrete's, of course, a major source in our society of greenhouse gases, mostly via the production of cement. So about 8% of global emissions, CO2 emissions, are from concrete. Most of it comes from making the Portland cement, which is a binder in the concrete. So for every ton of cement, we emit about 0.8 to 0.9 tons of CO2. Where does the CO2 come from? Well, we take the limestone, calcium carbonate, right? We heat it up, we make the clinker. It heats up at about 1300 Kelvin in some sort of furnace. And those furnaces are typically powered by fossil fuels, so that produces CO2. But then the chemical reaction of heating the limestone releases CO2 directly as well. So how much? 400 pounds of CO2 or 180 kilograms is roughly released per cubic yard of concrete. That's of the cement in the concrete. And it's mostly the cement. I mean, there is aggregate that we add, right? Crushed rocks or cements or crushed rocks or stones or whatever. Most of the CO2 emissions from is from the cement itself. So the emissions scale with the amount of cement that you have in the mixture typically. So how do we reduce CO2 emissions? Well, you can try to use low carbon binders. You can use other materials to replace some of the cement. So you can use things like fly ash, slag, different clays, calcified clays. There's one called LC3 to try to reduce the amount of clinker. And we could maybe go down with some materials, some methods, cut CO2 per ton by about 40%. So instead of 0.8 to 0.9 tons of CO2 per ton of cement concrete, you can go to maybe half of that, but then you might be sacrificing on strength or some other issues. So lifetime, we're making more efficient kilns. Electric kilns is an idea. Have cleaner burning kilns so that we don't have those fossil fuels burned to heat the limestone. But the biggest thing is if we could extend the lifetime of concrete that we structure in our society, we could greatly reduce emissions. So this is where we come to Roman concrete. So I went to the climate conference in Glasgow after COVID ended in, I guess, 2021. And I visited the birthplace of my mother in Bonnybridge, Scotland. And she was born there in 1932. She's 93 now. And just up the road from where she grew up are Roman ruins. They have, just up on her very street. It's a small village in Scotland. Their claim to fame was a brick factory, a brick kiln, which is where her dad worked for many years, and many people living there worked over the years. But up the road is these walls and bases and earthwork. So there's big, huge sort of hills in the soil, which is a site of Roman ruins. They've done excavations there. These Roman ruins, this Roman concrete, can last thousands and thousands of years. So typically, in this particular ruins was like 2,000 years old. Walls in perfect shape. So why is the concrete still around? Why did it last so long? The Romans built structures in the ocean or on the coastlines that then got submerged at the end of the last ice age, and those structures are like 5,000 years old in seawater. Well, what is Roman concrete? It's a lime and volcanic ash-based concrete, so it's extraordinarily durable. As I said, many structures are still standing thousands of years later. And one of the reasons is two main factors, self-healing properties. So you get a crack in types of Roman concrete, and the crack could actually close up and recalcify. So how does that happen? Also, there's new studies that show that over time the Roman concrete increased in strength and durability. The Roman concrete, or so-called opus cementosum, they used mortars of lime from heated limestone. They mixed it with volcanic ash, and they combined it with stone or brick aggregates. And it was often the water in the mix was salt water. We're paranoid of salt in concrete now, right? Because it just shortens a lifetime. But the Romans figured out how to take salt in the concrete to their advantage. So basically, for their marine structures and coastal works, they used the volcanic material. They produced the concretes that hardened even under seawater. So they'd pour it; it would harden while it was in place. It wasn't made on the coast and then put into the ocean. It was often just poured in place in the ocean, and it did harden even under seawater and lower temperatures. And it formed these very rare minerals within. So we've analyzed this concrete. So why was it so durable? Well, the seawater reacting with volcanic ash and lime, it gradually forms these very rare crystals within the concrete. Some of these crystals, like there's some names like aluminous tobermerite or philipsite. These crystals form within the concrete, and they would basically stop crack propagation, and they would strengthen the material over time. So many of these Roman structures, like harbor piers, became stronger as they age because instead of weakening like Portland cement type concretes that we pour in the ocean now. So what are some of the chemistries involved in these concrete strengthening over time? There's a couple things like they talk about hot mixing and self-healing. So new studies show that hot mixing with the quicklime or calcium oxide mixed directly with volcanic ash, which are mostly small glass fibers, if you like, and with an aggregate and water, they generate high heat during the curing process. And that high heat can rapidly cool, and it leaves these so-called lime clasts or imperfections within the hardened mortar. And this lime within the structure is unreacted. Okay, it hasn't had chemical reactions yet. So these clasts, they act as a reservoir of reactive calcium. So when a crack forms in the material, seawater enters, you get these new calcium-rich minerals precipitating out and filling the cracks. And that gives the concrete intrinsic self-healing behaviors, if you like. And this is very, I mean, then you have to ask, how the hell did the Romans know how to do this? Did they just luck out? And this gets you to all of the conspiracy theories about visits to by extraterrestrials about that time period, and maybe they brought these technologies and transferred them to the Romans. I mean, we're not going to go there, but I guess
we could go there.
I guess the
let's go there.
I guess the how did they just fluke out? Did they just luck out? Like how?
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you believe we're alone?
No, I
In the
don't think.
universe?
No, I don't think we're alone in the universe. I think the odds of that are very low, actually.
They say there's a trillion universes.
Yes,
And,
yes.
I've read Michael Salla's books, which I highly recommend. He's a PhD, regular podcaster. His show is called Exopolitics. But
Anyway,
they say-
yeah. So
anyway, first, let's stick to concrete.
okay, so let me do a couple more minutes, and then let's go to Q&A for as long as you want. So, I got to
100% Chem Concrete. I want to tell you about.
Yeah, and then you can talk about that. So a bit more about the microstructure and mineralogy of concrete. The binding phase, like there's all these interleaved connections of what they call CASH, which stands for calcium aluminum silicate hydrate. Now for Portland cement in modern concrete, it's only CSH. It's a calcium silicate hydrate water, basically. So they've got the aluminum in the matrix, and over time, the reactions between the lime, the volcanic glass, the seawater, it forms this interlacing CASH network, if you like, and then you get all these different crystalline phases, like and these crystalline phases interrupt crack propagation. There's also some recent papers, modern scientific papers, that are trying to figure this out more. And some of them are arguing that the materials that they chose in the Roman concrete builds up internal pressures during the curing process, so that when a crack opens up in Roman concrete, the internal pressures within the material self-close the crack. And then that allows the and then the chemical reactions can actually reprecipitate lime and so on, and calcium, and form the strong bonds to close the crack completely. But so there's a whole bunch of things that, the crack propagation is reduced by the minerals, the internal pressures kind of force the crack together, and then the class within the calcium type class within the material, then they haven't reacted yet, so they chemically react in a similar fashion to when the concrete's actually being first cured. So how do we make concrete better? Well, we can try to emulate the Roman strategies, right? We can try these processes to try to make our concrete much longer lived, cut emissions. Now, I just want to talk about some things that we stick in concrete, of course, and I'm talking about rebar or rebar replacement. So the freeze-thaw cycles in southern Ontario are so deadly to concrete because the thermal expansion coefficient is quite different. For, if you stick a rebar, a steel inside, its thermal expansion is quite different from that of the concrete. Why do we stick it in? Because concrete, of course, is very strong under compression, very weak under tension. So obviously it leads to say, well, can we get materials that have the same thermal expansion as concrete and put those inside instead of steel? Well, there's a number of different things that people have been trying. Like how do we improve steel rebar? Well, we can coat the steel with epoxy, for example, to try to keep the moisture away from it. Because I said, when it starts to rust, that takes up more volume within the concrete, and it starts pushing the concrete apart, delaminating, etc., weakening. We can try galvanized steel, so add tin, so we have the steel is less corrosive. Or in marine environments, we often add stainless steel rebar. It's more costly, right? It's the steel with nickel. It doesn't corrode. There's certain brands like 316L or 316LN or 220S, which are used commonly in marine structures. It adds a lot of cost, but it is much more durable in marine environments. There's some, we can trickle an electric current through to try to pull away those ions that break reduce the corrosion. We could have a sacrificial anode system where a material with a better affinity for the electrons is connected so that the steel is protected in the rebar and your sacrificial anode outside corrodes. Especially in high-risk structures, bridges, marine applications. We can try non-metallic rebar, and there's materials called GFRP, which stands for glass fiber reinforced polymers. These bars, they're non-corrosive, high tensile strength, lightweight. It's an attractive solution, but then there's different failure mechanisms from them, and it adds cost. Or there's also FRP, which is just a fiber reinforced polymer, not glass fiber. So that's another option. And, we can go to lower permeability concrete. So we can use a lower water cement ratio. We can supplement the cement material with fly ash, slag, silica, etc. And have maybe slower curing so we can get stronger materials, less chloride or CO2 within the material to delay any corrosion on the rebar. Crystalline waterproofing with the admixtures, insoluble crystals within the pores and microcracks. There's different things that people are looking at, but it's a big area of active research because with a lifetime, you pour a sidewalk, and if you have to replace it in a city in 25, 30 years, right? It just, like city budget, it costs a huge amount of money to do that. So if we can make it more durable in the first place, not only are we better for the environment, reducing emissions, but our cities don't collapse, right? From our infrastructure costs are a huge amount, and we're way behind in upgrades to infrastructure in many countries. So in the U.S., for example, how many roads do you go along where the road is falling apart? The steel guardrails along the side are all corroded, and you're dodging potholes, huge wear and tear on vehicle maintenance, right? Trucks, heavy transport, are less efficient. This is all over, and a place like Ontario, we could be a world leader here. The Romans had nicer, warmer weather. They didn't go through all these freeze-thaw cycles, but so we have a perfect environment. If we can get concrete to last hundreds of years in southern Ontario with our climate and weather, and as weather extremes increase, this problem's only going to get more severe. So there's lots of things we can do. It's a very active area of research, and it's fascinating. So anyway, I've gone on for long enough talking about my grandmother and the Roman ruins down the street, and perhaps ETs transferring technology to the Romans so that they knew how to build stuff that would last thousands of years, whereas it falls apart in decades in our modern society, so-called modern society. We think we're really smart, but there's some engineering in the past was just phenomenal. We wouldn't have the capability almost to do it today, even. Like try building a pyramid to replicate what the Egyptians did, for example. And some of the, when they built structures in the ocean, huge structures, they're still there. I mean, with sea level change, we're finding different structures that were, cities that were, once above sea level and are now below sea level. And you go, and there's still, they were just so well built, some things in the past that, we don't do that today. We're more of a throwaway society, I guess, today. Anyway, I could go on, but it's time to hear from Martin and you and yourself, Dante. How did you meet this guy, Martin, anyway? And what did he do?
Dante is a producer that gets involved.
And what did he do to bribe you to do this show here?
Well, he just offered a good price to produce it. So I befriended him. I forget where we met Dante, but probably through. He does comedy shows in Toronto.
Oh, you do comedy? Okay, I'm taking a comedy course in February. It's stand-up comedy.
Well, we've got a couple of characters that you could watch their podcast. Dante can send you a few.
Yeah, I'd love to see them.
Clips after, you know, now that he's got your email.
Yeah, it's Absolute Comedy on Preston Street in Ottawa. They're a very active comedy club.
Yep.
And a good friend of mine from high school is Glenn Foster.
Okay.
So he's been very active on the comedy scene for like 4 or 5 decades. And there's a group in England that are using comedy to try to explain climate change to people. They have comedians, and they've been doing this for a few months, and it's very effective, right? So
Are you going to use an alias, Paul, or are you going to just be Paul Beck?
no, I'm gonna I do all my videos, so I'll throw some comedy skits, 7 minutes or so on there. But I mean, it's funny because the number one fear that people have is public speaking, and the number 2 fear is death. So, in other words, if you go to a funeral, the person giving the eulogy would rather be in the casket.
That's a good joke, I guess.
There you go. I'm working on material, so okay.
Put that one. So, on the topic of concrete, I wanted to introduce you to a few things. Your self-healing. Go ahead. You gotta go.
Before we get too much, we do have 8 minutes left. So just as a heads up, if you want, we can.
Okay. Well, when it knocks off, Paul, because my Zoom.
Yeah, then I'll just rejoin.
You re-click it.
Yeah.
We'll go right to the end and then.
Yeah, might as well, because we might want the time to chat.
I wanted to share some illustrations and some information about chem concrete. Chem concrete would be the closest thing to Roman concrete in the fact that it's self-healing nanotechnology. It's actually a world patent by some really smart Iranian guys. We could get into Iranian jokes, but I think what's happening in Iran is terrible.
Well, the water shortage, like they may have to move Tehran. Did you hear about that? The whole city of Tehran could move. Like it may have to move northward to have access to water. It's a huge issue.
Yeah, well, I guess they're just out maybe hundreds of feet deep, right? I don't know. There's always water when you go down.
Yeah, you have to go deeper and deeper. Yeah.
But anyway, chem concrete is a very smart group of PhDs from University of Australia, and I've been involved with it, and it's been handy for some of my patents. Like I have a waterproof wall. Can you share one of the files, Dante? I think I can even give you the one that this concrete actually beats
you want the
water.
patent one?
Yeah, I gave you five. So this is chem concrete. This is a sample. You'll notice that it's cracked off, but it's just for a sample. But it beats water, Paul. So the key to concrete durability is that it is impermeable. Like if you're impermeable, then it'll do this type of thing. That's the nanotechnology within that. So I have a waterproof wall patent. If you were to pour a sidewalk, it would beat water. So, and we have no idea. I would think generally it's long lasting. Concrete suffers from rebar, and a very popular alternative is MST rebar. Borgnia has got a 300,000 square foot plant. He sells about 400 million a year. GFRBs, so glass bar. So when you get the expansion and contraction characteristics of this to match that, like in the MTO highway world, they flat spec MST rebar. So it's quite cost effective. It's light. You have to hot bend it. But other than that, if it's detailed properly, it's the same cost. So here it is. People are using rebar in your parking garage that needed rehab. It's very likely the rebar and a porous concrete, which could come from adding water and affecting the mix design itself. A lot of people add water to make it easy to push around and finish. but then that water increases permeability. When you talk about the crystalline, which you did mention that is true that Crichton and Zypex are billion-dollar companies, they're Canadian companies. They're 30% waterproof. This product is 95% waterproof. And I've done a series of podcasts on it lately. So the Contractors Innovation podcast, try to get contractors on, and my friend Jim Kaler, who's handling the U.S., I recommended him actually for the U.S. He's got ChemConcrete.
Okay, well, what I'll do is, I have, I'm approaching 50,000 subscribers on my channel. What I'll do is I'll highlight.
Maybe I could come on the channel.
Yeah. I think we've had you on to Climate Emergency Forum. I generally, for my channel, when we have interview people, I do it through the group Climate Emergency Forum, or another group called Facing Future, where we have guests as much as possible, whereas my channel is just more on the papers and stuff. But what I'll do is I'm also filming myself with my camera, what I'm saying today, and I was going to post it up on my channel, and then I'll give all the links to. What I'll do is I'll talk about talk about different videos that you've done that with your channel, and I'll really try to promote it, and you should see a jump in the number of viewers, like for this program on your channel, and also for some of the previous ones. I'll talk about in a separate video. I'll just highlight your channel, and I'll just talk about the different topics that you've discussed and some of the products that you're talking about. And again, it's very important. I mean, my audience is climate change mostly, but also scientists. So they're very interested in anything that can reduce greenhouse gases, and this is a perfect. Not only, I mean, there's many reasons to do it, right? Not just, if it had nothing to do with climate, I mean, it's going to be a lot cheaper. If it's a lot durable, you can make, you don't have all of these huge infrastructure costs for cities or municipalities. And like, there's all kinds of positive benefits. So how do you get the water to be beaded and excluded? And is this a property throughout?
Well, that's a cured sample.
Right.
That has, somebody's taken a water dropper and put it on it.
Yeah.
So normally concrete would suck that water up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It breathes, right? It's porous. Yeah.
We'll make sure you get a copy of this, Paul. This file. You must be pretty well at the end on it now.
Yeah.
2 minutes left.
45
2
minutes.
minutes. Okay.
Okay.
So MST rebar, which the MTO uses, my goal, I told ChemConcrete, I'd like to, if you go to chemconcrete.ca, that would be my channel, and I've got a company called CH Shotcrete. We're trying to be the Toronto rep for ChemConcrete. So that'll be, I understand the product very well, but you can actually take a standard mix design and put this admixture in instead of crystalline. Crystalline's $30. This is quite cost effective. It's 95% waterproof, but it's less money than crystalline. So it's going to take the world market. And the guy's got a world patent. His name is Sam. Very bright PhD. He's got a whole team of people, probably 15 PhDs support. And then all these other countries are opening up now. So it bodes well for sustainability and for the thing you mentioned, infrastructure costs. They're still doing standard rebar in subways in Toronto, 1 meter walls, and a density of 2,400 kilograms per cubic meter. And that's the older design characteristic of our civil engineering today in terms of these.
30
go ahead.
seconds remaining.
Yeah, so we're going to rejoin this.
Okay.
And,
So we'll have a break, and I'll look for the. Is it the same link?
it's going to be a new one.
New one. Okay. So just email me the link, and then we're set to go. Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay.